Lala Lajpat Rai strongly emphasized the importance of vocational education as an essential part of the Indian education system. He believed that vocational education was necessary to make students self-reliant by providing them with practical skills and training that could lead to employment or entrepreneurship. I, Nirmala Thakur, your host, brings today some more ideas on vocational education by Lala Lajpat Rai. Lajpat Rai was a witness to the new phenomena in the field of education. He saw that the educational system of the world had been revolutionized by the economic needs of the age. Not only industries and trade, but even agricultural methods had undergone a colossal transformation. Referring to the poverty of the masses, which had assumed an alarming proportion and was still continuing to pursue India's multitudes as a ghost, he found the panache in a widespread system of vocational education and requirement of an adequate training for an occupation for everyone. This training was to be made a necessary part of education as it enabled one to earn his livelihood and to increase the national productivity. Justifying the need for vocational education for India, he pointed to a paradox that while the Indian people were miserably poor, India as a country was rich in productive power of its soil, in mineral, in human as well as material resources. He wrote that before the British had occupied the country, people had plenty to eat and could easily meet their own demands of life. Their standard of life was simple. The gulf between the wealth, competence, and poverty was not as wide then as it had come to be over time. However, with the coming of the British rule, the economic life underwent a veritable revolution. Prior to the advent of machines for the production of commodities, mankind lived in the pastoral age. Their chief occupation was to produce food. Very few people then were engaged in handicrafts and art. People were not pressed for time and they did their work leisurely. In the changed situation of appalling poverty of the masses, adequate training for an occupation as well as training through occupation itself had become imperative. Since an occupation was a continuous activity having a purpose, thus he emphasized every child should have the best training in some vocation. As soon as he completed the school education, he or she should be looked by the agency to help him or her in prosecuting his studies further. It was their duty to prepare them to make them fit for some industry or profession. They should also provide means for the continuation of their studies during leisure hours. In short, they were duty bound to place facilities or opportunities within their ready reach by which they could further their prospects, make the most, and get the best out of themselves. Schools and colleges were required to follow their alumni in life and render them all the needed help by advice and otherwise in their careers throughout life. Lajpat Rai strongly urged the introduction of vocational education that the future generation of India was fully equipped to meet the challenge of the era of scientific and technological advances. While the educational system in the world had been revolutionized by the economic imperatives of the age and world had gone ahead, he lamented Indians were still lagging far behind. He noticed that educational institutions in India were not catering to the instruction in the modern industries, methods, and modern tools. He regretted that with such a rich soil and abundant natural resources of all kinds, his country could not produce sufficient quantity of food and other necessaries to satisfy even the minimum demands of half of its population. This was due to lack of education. Under these circumstances, he emphasized the first aim of education in India should be to increase the number of literates, their productive capacity, and proper use, conservation, and development of human and natural resources. This could be achieved through a widespread system of vocational education, scientific knowledge applicable to the ordinary needs of life, and vocational efficiency. Vocational education in USA. In this respect, Lajpat Rai praised the American schools and colleges, which were known to give possible encouragement to self-supporting boys and girls. The authorities took interest in them and allowed them to complete their education by installment. He saw people in the United States just almost mad about vocational education. They deemed it most important to make every child fit for some special occupation or business in life. The whole superstructure of education was being more or less built upon that imperative. The property and the wealth of a community, he believed, depended on the producing power of its members. To provide for the development and increase of its producing power and well-equipped workforce was then the business and duty of the state and the community. This could be done in two ways, that is, by mechanical improvement and by improvement of the brains of the nation and training every child to do the best he or she could could in producing wealth. The object was individual prosperity as well as national prosperity. With this end, every citizen was required to specialize for some trade or vocation or business or profession. This will help him definitely to know his place in the national machinery and accordingly fit him to fill that place in to the best advantage for himself and the nation. There were various ways to achieve this goal. Lala Lajpat Rai admired and was influenced by the American system of vocational education, especially its practical approach that combined intellectual and skill based training. He often referred to the USA and Japan as examples where education included physical and vocational training to build self reliant, skilled citizens who could contribute to national development. Lajpat Rai advocated for a similar holistic educational framework in India that integrated vocational education, physical education, and moral patriotic education to nurture capable, industrious youth for the country's socio-economic upliftment. There were various ways to achieve this goal. Each child should be given a certain amount of manual training as was given for his mind or memory. Besides, drawing and modeling should be made a necessary part of each child's education. He be given his elementary instruction in some trades such as carpentry, smithing, bookbinding, shoemaking, or something of that kind in the case of boys, sewing, cooking, domestic economy, including washing, table, plates, laundry, table laying, attending a table, decorating a house, keeping rooms neat and tidy. In the case of girls, gardening to be taught to both and mathematics be made an important component of general education. After completing his or her eighth grade course, every child or those looking after his education had to decide whether they would prosecute their general studies in high school and then in college, preparatory to their having special and technical instruction in the business of their life, or whether they would go in at once for the later. If they chose the later course, then they must choose the vocation and join an institution which gave instruction in that vocation. Here they had received both kinds of education, general and vocational, but with special emphasis on the latter. A child entering life after his elementary course, that is, after only 8 years of school life, must remain an unskilled laborer unless and until he or she learnt a particular vocation. Formerly, this was mostly done by apprenticeship in different trades. Later, it came to be done in schools and colleges. The best and the highest interest of the nation demanded that the number of children who entered life immediately after finishing the elementary school education was required to be the lowest possible, and that every child ought to be trained to be a skilled laborer or an artisan or a handicraftsman. Between the elementary school educated unskilled laborer and highly finished product of the technological institutes or universities, another class of educational institutions was provided offering specialized instruction to the majority of the nation's boys and girls in different vocations. These institutions were called vocations, trade, business, industrial, or agricultural schools. Every kind of conceivable industry or trade or business was taught in these schools. The agencies engaged in this work were state aided and private. We found that in USA, the federal government and the different states were spending colossal sums of money in furthering the cause of vocational education. In the educational exhibit placed by the Federal Department of Education in Panama Pacific International Exposition at San Francisco, he found the following exhibits in big letters as indicating the mind of the United States federal government on the subject. The state that fails to educate dooms its children to industrial subjugation to those states that do educate. More than once have nations lost their land for lack of education. Shall we prepare our children to hold this land? Shall we equip an industrial army? Thus, for Lajpat Rai, the school, the university, the laboratory, and workshop were the battlefields of this new warfare. The NEP 2020 aligned vocational centers reflect Lala Lajpat Rai's vocational education model in several important ways. Integration of practical skills with academic learning, like Rai's emphasis on combining theoretical knowledge with hands-on vocational training. NEP 2020 mandates embedding vocational education from early school grades, allowing students to intern with local artisans and professionals, gaining real-world experience alongside classroom instruction. Focus on local context and Indian knowledge systems. NEP 2020 promotes learning rooted in the local cultural and economic context, including traditional crafts and indigenous knowledge, resonating with Rai's nationalistic approach, emphasizing education for social upliftment and self-reliance. Multidisciplinary and holistic learning. NEP advocates for flexible curriculum structures that blend vocational training with core academic subjects and 21st century skills such as critical thinking and creativity, mirroring Rai's vision for cooperative education that balances intellectual and practical skill development, community engagement, and social responsibility. Both NEP 2020 and RISE model encourage community involvement and preparing youth to contribute effectively to nation building by developing patriotism, self-discipline, and employable skills through vocational centers that act as hubs of learning and social empowerment. Overall, NEP 2020 vocational centers operationalize Lala Lajpat Rai's ideas by creating inclusive, experiential learning environments that empower students with market-relevant skills, cultural pride, and a sense of social responsibility, advancing the nation's economic and social development. Lala Lajpat Rai created several models uh, in this respect, like Dayanand Anglo-Vedic DAV College and Schools, which Rai helped establish, continue to emphasize a blend of modern education with vocational and skill-based training rooted in Indian cultural values. The Lajpat Rai Institute of Engineering and Technology in Moga offers technical and vocational programs aligned with Rai's vision of practical skills oriented education. Lala Lajpat Rai, DAV College in Jagraon, and other DAV institutions promote vocational education alongside academic learning, reflecting his emphasis on producing self-reliant and skilled youth. Gulab Devi Chest Hospital, originally a tuberculosis hospital founded by Rai's Trust, also reflects his social reform efforts linked to practical vocational training in healthcare. The Lala Lajpat Rai University of Veterinary and Animal Sciences in Hisar integrates vocational skills in veterinary sciences and agricultural education. These institutions embody Rai's vision of cooperative, practical, and nationalistic education by combining vocational training with intellectual and moral development to meet societal needs and contribute to nation building. How to replicate a Lajpat Rai style vocational center in a district? If you follow these key steps based on best practices and Rai's educational philosophy. Number one, establish a cooperative education hub. Create a center combining academic learning with hands-on vocational training in trades aligned with local needs. Example, carpentry, tailoring, agriculture, electrical work, fostering self-reliance and practical skills. Number two, community involvement. Collaborate with local industries, artisans, NGOs, and government skill missions to ensure relevant market-oriented training and opportunities. Number three, integrate moral and national consciousness. Include lessons on patriotism, social responsibility, and Indian cultural heritage, reflecting RAI's emphasis on education for nation building. Number four, provide infrastructure and resources. Equip the center with necessary tools, classroom, and workshops. Offer uniforms, toolkits, and training material for learners to practice skills effectively. Offer life skills and capacity building. Combine vocational skills with soft skill training, communication, discipline, teamwork, and entrepreneurship. Certification and employability. Partner with recognized bodies like NSDC or NIOS for certification, ensuring that trainees are job ready or empowered to start their own ventures. Inclusive and sustainable. Ensure access for marginalized groups, women, and differently abled learners. Incorporate sustainable practices like waste management or organic farming if possible. This model mirrors the successful initiatives seen in prisons, government vocational centers, and legacy institutions inspired by Lala Lajpat Rai's vision, blending practical skill development with social upliftment and national pride. Thanks for your time. I'll be back again soon with another episode. Till then, goodbye.